Art of War is partnering up with Goonhammer and Joe from War Games Live to bring to you the greatest Streamhouse RTT ever. We've gathered the strongest competitors out there. Quentin Johnson, Kazra Hushidar, Adam Camilleri, Mark Perry, Nick Nanavati, Richard Siegler, John Lennon, and current ITC champion Jack Harpster. These brave warriors are going to duke it out for you over a double elimination format Thursday, March 30th through Sunday, April 2nd. 15 games, 11 rounds, all streamed to you on the Art of War YouTube channel. We asked our friends over at Goonhammer to seed us and put us into a bracket, and then in reverse order of seed, we drafted factions. 8 top players, 8 different factions. We've even partnered with Away Games, who's professionally painted 2 beautiful sets of Art of War specific terrain. That's right, we're creating our own Art of War tournament terrain set. Watch live, and not only can you catch the action in real time, but you'll be entered into a raffle to win prize support from our wonderful sponsors, objective markers from 3D6 Wargaming, Army Painter Mega Sets from the Army Painter, Warp Fire Minis, Big Bear 3D, Table War, and so many more. Keep an eye on the Art of War YouTube channel for daily list reveals starting Wednesday, March 15th. All games will be available for rewatch for our lore members at any time.
Hey everybody, welcome to my Tau list breakdown. This video is going to first of all focus on why I chose Tau as my faction for the Streamhouse RTT, and then the list that I am actually taking, some of the design choices I made knowing the meta that I'm playing against, and then finally why I think Tau is pretty decently positioned, even though their win rate is a bit lower. I think it's around 44% right now. I still think they are a strong faction in Arcs of Omen, but they are definitely on the harder side to play now, which I think is totally fine. I think the previous playstyle was a little silly in terms of alpha striking people turn 1. Now you actually need to play out a bit more of a game, and I think Tau have the tools to do so, and hopefully I'm going to explain that in this list. So first of all, why did I end up choosing Tau? Well, Tau is one of my favorite factions. I haven't had the chance to play a ton of games in Arcs of Omen with them, but I've been exploring a Bor'kan Sept style build. I played Farsight Enclaves for pretty much most of Nephilim, and pretty much since the Codex release, honestly, and I found that Farsight Enclaves it's just such a great playstyle. All the extra commanders you could bring really put it over the edge for me, because I think the commander datasheet is one of the best datasheets in the Codex. Once again, no surprise there. And I wanted to maximize. I actually had a really cool double enforcer build that I was going to experiment with, and then all of a sudden Arcs of Omen comes out. You can only have up to 2 commanders with heroic support, so that kind of put an end to my aspirations for playing more Farsight Enclaves. And with only 2 commanders possible, I think other Septs like Bor'kan and Sisea, obviously Tau Sept has always been quite strong, are much more viable, which is great to see. I think custom Septs as well have more play. So I think Tau are well positioned in the sense that they have more variety in choices starting at the list design phase. So that's got me more excited about them in Arcs of Omen. Now, why didn't I pick the other factions? Admech, first of all, I assumed that Guard would honestly be played in this RTT, and Admech have a horrible matchup into Guard. Kasrkin basically delete a brick for 100 points cheaper, so you're trading down. And Lehman Russes are also, yes, you can run tons of Last Cannon Iron Striders and fight against them, but even on the turn where you commit, what Guard can do is they can put out 2 of the Russes and get angles, and if you pop out your Iron Striders to kill 2 Russes, they then kill all your Iron Striders in return, and it's not a great trade because you basically lose from that point on. So because Admech are in a position with their secondaries where they're better, but they have to make things happen, Guard get to play a nice defensive game, rack up points, and then when you do step out, they have that overwhelming firepower. And Admech shoot pretty hard, but Guard are one of the strongest shooting armies to be released in this edition. So they have a lot of tools that are annoying to deal with, and their order to push things back from coming in within 12 also kind of prevents the real power of Admech's strategic reserves, which is a style you can play now, but Guard kind of shut it down as well, unfortunately. So that's the main reason I didn't pick Admech. If Guard were nerfed, if Kasrkin in particular were nerfed previously, I wish they were in the FAQ, I would have ended up taking Admech because I also love that faction, and I think the Lucius playstyle is very difficult for a lot of the top armies to deal with besides Guard, so I probably would have taken a Lucius build or Agrippina. But I didn't do that. Necrons, they struggle against a lot of tough things in the meta. The warrior unit is amazing now, but once again, guard are a big problem for Necrons, as well as some of the more vehicle-heavy armies out there. I think Leagues of Votann can be quite difficult for Necrons, although I didn't really expect anybody to pick up Leagues of Votann due to their secondary problems. In terms of Grey Knights, I did want to play Grey Knights, but Adam snagged Grey Knights from me, so I could not play them. And in terms of Leagues of Votann itself, like I said, there's a huge secondary problem there, so you're always under the gun to make something happen, and I don't want that pressure every single game. Although I did play with AdMech with that same type of pressure at WTC. So ended up going with Tau here because I think outside of AdMech, they have the best spread of matchups, and they have, because of some of their units can be non-interactive, in particular Strike and Fade Crisis Suits, but also Riptides. You can create a play style where you always have a resource advantage. And Tau also have some of the best screening units in the game. The Kroot Shaper with the Scrambler Relic, Kroot Hounds, cheap drone units, popping off units. They have very good screening elements and cheap resources to put out into the middle of the table. So even though their secondary game is relatively middling, decisive action's great. You have to pick a kill secondary, but it could be good if your opponent gives it up, and then you pick an action secondary, or if they have a Bore the Witch, you pick that. It's not a bad secondary suite. You do eventually have to make something happen, but you can at least play out a game with Tau now, I think. So I've gone with them here, and I picked Bor'kan because it's the one I've spent the most time playing. I don't necessarily think it's the strongest way to play Tau. I think, like I said, there's 4 or 5 different options, and they're going to kind of depend on the local meta that you're playing. But I think Bor'kan suits the more mission. It suits playing against players who like playing the mission, which is a lot of the people that are going to be at this tournament. Most of them want to play a nice trading game over the course of 5 turns and aren't going to kind of just jam their army in the center of the table. Although Jack is the one person who would do that, I still think Tau are pretty good into that style because they can do a lot of damage. So because they're positioned like that, I ended up going with Bor'kan. I think the extra defensive mechanics, and you're going to see the amount of defense I stack on this big brick of Crisis Suits, is pretty great. And I don't really ever use their strat to turn off invulns, but it could come up where you really need to do so. Unfortunately, it doesn't work against demonic saves, otherwise it would 100% come up. And the other great thing about Bor'kan is that you can take a second commander that is as good as the Precision Hunter commander, or slightly worse than him, but basically right there. You can take 2 of the best commanders that Tau can possibly create with Relics and Warlord traits, and this is the guy with Seeker of Perfection. Amazing Warlord trait, and I have been experimenting with Tau lists that do more mortal wounds as a way to get through some of these Tzeentch Chaos Demon lists, which can be problematic for Tau, and I really like the extra mortals that Seeker of Perfection puts out, but it's good against almost everything. Extra AP is awesome on all those Volume of Fire burst weapons. So let's go ahead and jump into the list, and then I'll explain my choices. Commander in Cold Star, this is the Seeker of Perfection commander. He has the high output burst cannon, and he has a regular burst cannon, and then the second burst cannon is upgraded to the DW02 advanced burst cannon. Helps help against phase cap units, but it's just a volume of fire weapon, and with Seeker Perfection, it goes to AP2. And finally, a missile pod is the last weapon. I had to throw something in there. I could have thrown all sorts of just random weapons in there, or could have paid a premium to get another burst cannon and go for real supreme volume of fire. But I felt like with 10 shots from the high output, 8 shots from the DW02, and then another 6 from the regular one, I already had enough volume. That's enough to reliably proc those 3 mortal wounds on the 6s to wound. And I just wanted as many weapons that took advantage of +1 AP, where they actually start doing quite a bit of damage against things, especially when you also potentially combine them with coordinated engagement as needed. So this guy is very powerful. I have often put the Bor'kan specific relic, Overdrive Power Systems, I believe it's called, for you pick 2 of your weapons, which would be the high output and the DW02, and give it +1 to wound if you're in half range. Bor'kan is +4 inch range, which is really nice in this meta, especially against armies like Harlequins that can subtract range from you. But it meant that if you're within 11, you get +1 to wound. I felt that I rarely wanted to get within 11 until I teleported him, in which case I was teleporting because I knew it was already relatively safe. that I was going to kill this unit, and in that case I probably don't need +1 to wound. So I typically play relatively safe with these commanders because I want them shooting all 5 turns. So instead I put Solid Image Projection Unit, which is a 4-up invuln, as well as I blank a save. So I've often found that sometimes the Gold Star can get into trickier situations, not quite as defensive as the upgrades I put on the Crisis Commander, but still pretty darn solid. And this can keep him alive against things that otherwise would, barely kill him. He also has 2 marker drones in here, just does a little bit of extra beef, but also can just help throw marker lights down every turn. Since he's a character, the unit can be character protected, and I can still get active marker lights going down the table as needed. And Bor'kan definitely, as I'm not playing Farsight Enclaves, I don't auto get marker lights within a certain range, so I need units that reliably put them out. And as you'll see, I have some pretty reliable marker lights that are hard to take away from the list, which I think is important for this style. Moving on to the next commander, we've got the Crisis Commander here. I am a big believer in the Crisis Commander. Fallback, shoot, and charge is an amazing rule. On top of that, you have ignore modifiers. Very helpful on the Art of War terrain setup that we've created, where similar to WTC, there are a lot of basically terrain formations that are -1 to hit. They're dense cover and they're light cover, and these are usually in the firing angles. So because I'm shooting through dense cover, I really, really want my Crisis Suit ignoring that as best as possible, and then getting access to +1 to hit via the marker light. So I can still get them hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s, and that's perfectly fine for the volume of fire approach I've went for. So I definitely think that as many reliable marker lights as possible is crucial here. And so once again, 2 more marker lights are on this commander. He's got 2 cyclic ion blasters. I could have went for 3. Usually I do in a lot of lists, but I decided at the end of it, I just wanted a couple extra cheap resources. So I went 2 cyclic, 1 missile pod, and then I have the prototype flamer here, the thermoneutronic projector. And he's Precision to the Hunter, so full rerolls to hit and wound. Amazing warlord trait, probably the best one in Tau. And then the Begel Hunter's Plate, which is a relic for defense. He has Iridium Armor, so he's a 2-up armor. Begel Hunter's Plate is +1 save, so he sits on a 1-up save. If he's getting shot at and he's in cover, he's at a 0-up save. And he has a 5-up Field of Pain on top of that, along with his 2 drones. So very defensive here, and can survive, a very fast combat unit kind of skirting around the edges of my army and trying to snipe him out. And snipers in general, I am worried about the Death Jester in Harlequins. It is a ridiculously powerful unit. It was nerfed. They brought this Warlord trait Death Jester combo back for no reason whatsoever. And so anybody who's playing Eldaria is going to probably bring this Death Jester, and so you're going to have to be prepared for it. And if it snipes out your commanders, it's horrible for you. So Bor'kan with the -1 strength helps there. And on top of that, I just have defensive relics on my Cold Stars to make sure that they stay alive, or my 2 commanders to make sure they stay alive. Moving on, and these guys are going to be damage dealers for 5 turns out of the game. Just keep them alive, keep them alive. They're buffing the Crisis unit as needed, but they're my late game damage. They're my consistent damage throughout the game, and then late game, they're the ones who can carry, a close win into a clear win, or a potential loss into a win. Then we got Kroot Shaper. He has the advanced EM Scrambler, which is your opponent cannot come within 12 inches from reserves. Very useful. It's just like Space Marine Infiltrators, which have become pretty automatic for those type of lists. Same exact thing in a Tau list. This guy is only 25 points, but takes up less space because it's only a single model. Does have a pre-game move, is relatively fast, and is going to be supported by the Stealth Suit units here. On the AOW terrain format, there is a cargo container feature in which you have to charge around because most units don't simply ignore terrain in the charge phase. And with that, I have the Stealth Suits kind of hanging around, and they can be -2 to charge. They're natively defensive, but they're going to protect the Kroot Shaper, and he's going to project a 12-inch of you can't come in and try and charge out of reserves onto my objective near that cargo container feature. So I got this nice little defensive setup here between the 2 of them, although I could use this relic more aggressively, especially against an army like Demons, where their whole shtick is I come in closer than 12 inches away. The Kroot Shaper says no. And then finally, Envoy. So we are playing with the ruling that has happened at Frontline and I believe WTC events, where technically the named ethereal ruling is that they can slot into any army and they don't disrupt your Sept traits. Even though Anva is Tau Sept, he doesn't stop me from benefiting from Bor'kan. Games Workshop just completely forgot that Philosophies of War is a separate rule, Kaoyun and Monka, and technically you have to be pure Sept in order to benefit from it. However, most events have ruled that this is just an oversight. I assume they talked to somebody at Games Workshop and they were like, how did we forget that? So most of the major events have ruled as such, and so I am running Anva here, and he is not interrupting any of my Tau rules. So I could have went for Anshi. The reason I went for Anva is, once again, sniping is a risk, and he has extra wounds because he has 2 ethereal bodyguards. They have some amount of combat, but unless I'm playing against an army that's not really running any combat as well, they're not really doing too much. But it's just extra ablative wounds. He's -1 to wounds and 5 up invuln, so he can tank a bit of damage and survive. But the reason I went for him instead of regular ethereal is because I don't have any more CP. The commanders both take up 2 each, and the Shaper takes up 1, and then in order to get both commanders, I have to pay a CP for heroic support. So bam, that's 6 CP. I don't have any more, so I can't afford the Humble Stave Relic to cast an additional and cast on a 2+, in which case I don't think an ethereal is worth it. So instead, I've gone for the name ethereal here. And Anva was the choice because, like I said, he has extra ablative wounds. He's the same thing as Anshi in that they know 3 and they cast 2 on a 2-up, but he, instead of a 6-inch aura of use his leadership, which Anshi has, Anva has a 9-inch aura of you use his leadership, and his leadership is 10. So once again, against demons, he is going to help my army push back the demons with gaining a much higher leadership. It's not really much higher, because honestly, Tau have one of the better leaderships for a supposedly low leadership army. They lost access to a lot of their 8th edition morale mechanics, and so Games Workshop just buffed their leadership, which I think is fine. It keeps it cleaner, there's less rules involved in it. But giving out leadership 10 is quite useful, especially against armies like demons, and I thought demons would be picked in this RTT. They're also just one of the strongest armies win rate-wise, so you have to anticipate them. And on top of that, they have amazing anti-Tau rules in not only demonic saves, specifically the Zinch units, but just in coming in from reserve, denying primary turn after turn. It's hard to play that matchup. You need really precise screening, and the tools I have here with the Shaper and Leadership 10 aura are going to be massive on top of -2 to charge from my battle suits or the Breachers. So the invocations I went for here, Sense of Stone, 5 of Fiend of Pain on a Crisis unit is awesome, but I could put this on the stealth suits to make them a little more durable as well. As you'll see, I have a slightly larger than normal unit. I thought about running a big one, but I'll get to that in a second. Then I went for Zephyr's Grace, which is -1 to hit, and this can stack with dense cover, so you could be -2 to hit. Yes, minuses are only capped at 1, but there are several armies out there that have pluses to hit, and if they're +1 to hit on -2, they're still -1 at the end of the day. So useful there, but it also means I don't have to stand in dense cover to get a -1, and it just means that my Crisis unit can be very, very durable if they get that. And then finally, Wisdom of the Guides, which is almost always an auto take. It is +1 command point. Very useful because Tau have a lot of 1 CP utility strats, and having access to them turn after turn is awesome. Moving on to 10 Breachers. It's the only OBSEC in my army. I find the Breacher Devilfish combo, while very strong at denying primary, is expensive. It's a lot of points to try and deny primary because it's 10 Breachers instead of 5. You can't take the 5-mans anymore. And the Devilfish is 95 points. That's a lot to throw away turn after turn. I like it a bit more in Sasea, where you can make the Devilfish OBSEC, put that, move it up, touch an objective, and then disembark the Breachers, and then move and go touch a different objective and OBSEC 2 away. Then it's worth the points. But I think in most other ones, you want 1. This unit can raise banners, it can do aerospace targeting for me and finish it at the end of the turn. It can do a little bit of damage, but it can also, in the key turn I really need it, just go contest primary for myself. And then we've got the 5-man Crisis unit here. This is a unit that you probably haven't seen too often. I tested out the big squad a couple of times. The reason that I went away from it is because for a while, the Zinch Flamers were everywhere, and 3 units were very common. On top of that, they have a strat to max number of shots against units that have 11+ models. So this unit here has 5 crisis bodies. It has 4 shield drones and 6 marker drones. So that's a 15-man unit, which means it is blastable. And now, Zinj Flamers have gotten less common because they have to roll to hit, and you can stack minuses now since they're not auto-hitting. And in that case, I'm not as concerned about them because I'm -1 strength in Bor'kan. I used to run it in Farsight Enclaves where I didn't have that defensive mechanic. And then I can stack minuses to hit. So even though they're max shots, the Flamers still aren't going to just obliterate my Crisis unit. And that's good enough for me. There are a couple other units in here that are blast or just dangerous against these big units. So for instance, a unit of a big brick of Hearthguard with the double exploding 6s strat with full rerolls and judgment tokens, that could be a nightmare. But I didn't anticipate anybody playing Votann. And even if they did, I would just play carefully enough around that. So I decided to go with the big squad here because Tau don't have many things that can stand on an objective and just control it. And here I decided that if I needed something on this AOW terrain to eventually stand out on an objective, especially on the mission where objectives are pulled out in mission 33, I need something that can stand there and actually wither some fire, weather as much firepower as possible. And in that case, it is the fully buffed Crisis unit. So we've got the Stim Injector on the Shazray, as well as those 4 shield drones. I've got Iridium Armor on the Shazray as well, so he's a 2-up, 1-up in cover, and he's got access to a once per game 4-up Feel Pain when he takes damage. So this guy can tank a lot, plus the drones in there. And then I have 4 other models. All of them are double cyclic burst, which means I've got 30 cyclic shots and 30 burst cannon shots. That is a lot of volume of fire. I think it's mandatory. I expected Harlequins to be played along with Aldari. This unit can actually pick up a lot of units. Even though you're not rerolling to hit, you can make them hit on 3s, and that's probably good enough with the volume of fire. But Tau can struggle into those matchups. It's also amazing into demons, and just all the marine bodies that we're going to see, this unit is great into as well. I found that Plasma, while a solid weapon, since its points increase, you're usually only running 1 each, so it'd be 5 shots. I found that I probably hit with 3 or 4 of them, I wound with like 2 or 3 of them, my opponent makes at least 1 save, and like 1 goes through. And instead of pumping out 5 shots, I'd rather pay the premium to pump out a lot of shots. This unit is basically getting to fire all 5 turns out of the game if I play them properly, and because of Strike and Fade. And so I want to get max value, just tons of volume all over the place. And obviously I can synergize with Coordinated Engagement to get extra AP on these weapons to really push them over the edge. So I've gone for a volume of fire approach here instead of trying to plink damage away with weapons that have low volume of fire. And I'm not running Exemplar of the Monkas, so I don't have the safety net of reroll wounds to kind of make sure as many are punched through as possible. I also don't want to be within 9 or 12 inches, depending on which philosophy of war. So that's why I also didn't pick that Warlord trait. All right. Moving on to the stealth suits. Stealth suits you don't see too commonly, but they are very good mission tools. They're great for securing you airspace by just hanging near a terrain piece, finishing it off, or they can teleport. If they're within 9 inches of board edge, 1 CP, they go into reserve, they come down the next turn. They can do it, so you can get into your opponent's backfield in the late game. But I feel like they're excellent screens. They're -1 to hit natively. And on top of that, I have the Ethereal here, so I can make them even more defensive if I want to. And in Bor'kan, those Strength 5 weapons go down to Strength 4, so they wound you on 4s. Any Strength 4 weapons go to Strength 3, and so they're wounding you on 5s. And what I found is, you have things like mortars out there with guard. If they're -1 to hit, which could be ignored, let's just assume it's ignored, -1 strength is more annoying for them, wounding me on 4s, and then on top of that, they get +1 save when they're in cover, an additional +1, so they can sit on a 1-up, and even against AP1 indirect fire, I'm still taking 2-ups because I also get the +1 save from indirect rule. I think these guys, even though Kroot Hounds are a much cheaper screen and can still do a decent amount of surviving, they'll eventually get picked away by the indirect that still exists in the game, whereas stealth suits can survive pretty much all game against this, especially the Bor'kan ones. So I went for a little bit more durable screen here, especially because of the terrain format, where I think with the cargo container formation and the shaper, I can just kind of sit there protected for most of the game and not really worry about that objective being charged onto. or indirect fire picking away, because it's kind of far away from the other ruins, especially on the kind of diagonal deployments. So in my playtesting on our new terrain format, I found that I want something that can operate independently and is durable enough that I don't have to send extra resources up there every turn. And stealth suits kind of fit the bill there. All right. They can also infantry their forward deploy, so they can start up there. And I expected Space Marines to be a faction, whether it was Ultramarines, Iron Hands, Dark Angels, whatever it is, specifically against Iron Hands and Ultramarines, which will put 5 infiltrators on a diagonal deployment, block out above your deployment zone, and then put like 3 Invictor Warsuits there and potentially just do tons of damage to you turn 1. I wanted the ability to potentially slow that down with my own forward deploys. So stealth suits are useful that way as well. Moving on to fast attack, we've got 2 units of Kroot Hounds here. Just cheap, you know them, you love them. They're great for scoring decisive action, and they're great screens. Then we've got 1 Hammerhead gunship. It's 155 points because it has the double accelerator burst cannon, so good volume of fire out of it. And then the 1 railgun. And even though Bor'kan does not have the reroll wound like Farsight Enclaves or Tauseb do, part of their trait, I have the CP with Enva to potentially just throw a CP into a reroll on the wound roll if I need to. And the reason that I'm bringing it is mostly to access submunitions, which is a stratagem for the railgun. Instead of shooting the railgun, you roll a number of die and can do a bunch of mortal wounds, up to 8. This is a critical strat, in my opinion, against pink horrors. So against the Tzeentch pink horror spam, which I expected to see some amount of pink horrors, that strat is amazing to help your army get through. Now, I have the crisis unit that can potentially get through it as well, but now I have redundancy and the crisis unit can do other things. So it's a tech choice mostly for those type of units. It's pretty good into GSC as well, into their bigger bricks of units. But 1 is enough where I don't really care if it flops in a turn. It's not a key part of my damage. It's an additional tool to help me do damage in certain situations, but I'm not relying on it. Whereas if I ran 3 here, then I really rely on that damage going through every turn, and Hammerheads are pretty inconsistent. There's also several armies in the game that can blank damage, like Word Bearers, so I don't want to go into I didn't expect Word Bearers here, obviously, but there are rules like that in the game, so I don't want to rely overly so on railguns. Flyers. 2 Sunshark bombers. You're saying, whoa, is this Nephilim? No, it's Arcs of Omen. But they do start in reserve. I think it is a benefit for me personally because, yes, running people over turn 1 was awesome, felt great. Collecting that salt turn 1, beautiful. But at the same time, I still think that the profile you get from the Sunshark bomber for the price, it's still a great amount of firepower. They bring Markolites to the table at angles as well, although you can't shoot them out of reserve because you can't start the action. But in future turns, if you start in your backfield and then come up the next turn, which is probably what I'm doing, then they can also fire Markolites at things you normally aren't seeing with Markolite units. They get the two missile pods, they got the secret missiles. It's just a great volume of fire package for pretty cheap. And they come in from reserves, they get an angle on some screening unit, pick it away, but play defensive with them, that plus 4-inch range helping there, and then they get behind your opponent the next turn. I expected Aldari, and obviously demons and some of these janky armies that can kind of just hold down their backfield with the bare minimum amount of units. I expected them in this RTT. Sunshark bombers are actually pretty good into those armies. They don't have very much long-range firepower or any way to deal with them when I come in. I basically shoot for free. They come down, and then I can get into their backfield and start disrupting them. I can also do plays where I send the 2 Sunshark bombers up. I teleport. So Sunshark's in reserve. I bring the stealth suit unit up into reserve, and the next turn, Sunsharks come in and stealth suits come in an area, and then I can teleport the Cold Star and have a really nice kind of aggressive foothold on my opponent's half of the board. The Crisis unit could even jet over there 18 inches if it wants to. So I have ways to kind of play at the angles and start disrupting a defensive opponent. I think it's pretty critical against Aldari, which now have Fire and Fade back every single turn. So if you're both doing that, it's going to come down to secondaries. Eldar have an automatic 12 on Warp Ritual, which I really hate. The non-interactive just can't do anything about the secondary. So Because of that, you're under a little bit of pressure to make things happen. Sun Sharks make things happen, and I really like that. But they're also just volume of fire for relatively cheap. And in Bor'kan, all those strength 6 type of guns, or strength 7, wounding you on 4s, strength 6 wounding you on 5s now, because they go down to strength 5, and anything strength 4 goes to strength 3 and is wounding you on 6s. So decent defensive profile as well. And then finally, we got the Devilfish here with 2 gun drones. It's going to support the breachers and be something to soak up mortals, tie up enemy units, just be an annoyance, be a screen when I need it to. So that's the list. You're going to be surprised there are no Riptides in here. Why are there no Riptides? I've won plenty of games in the War Room with Riptides over the past couple months. Most of the games have been pretty close, and Riptides have basically done very little in any of those games. Their shots are enormously swingy, and when they don't do anything, you feel it because it's a 250-point unit. On top of that, when you run Riptide, they are your main pressure to get up the board, and I just, for whatever reason, have found that they die. There's so much firepower in the game. They have a good defensive profile of a 2-up, 4-up invuln, and potentially 5-up Fiend of Pain if you do that version of the Nova Boost. Okay, that's fine. That is all solid, but they have just died. And I have found that the rest of my army basically won those games, regardless of the fact that I had Riptides. So I just went into this list design with, let's just forget that Riptides even exist. I love the ability to just fire and fade 3 Riptides and strike and fade a crisis unit and not interact with my opponent. But that's not how you win the mission. If you play very defensive like that, you're probably going to lose a close game with Tau. You could still win, and there's armies like against Votann where that is very strong because they basically don't have anything to do and you just kill them slowly as they expose themselves. But I'm not worried about Votann, and of the armies that I expected here, I expected a lot of armies that were going to force me to do something. And I don't want Riptides to be my trade piece because they're just too expensive. So I've gone with a more MSU, more toolkit approach, and I think this will be more fun to play as well. So I'm excited to bring it to the tournament. I think overall, toughest matchups are definitely going to be the Harlequins. Tau have just a tough game into Harlequins in general because if they play their cheap kind of trading defensive game and you don't get to shoot them, they're going to outscore you on primary. All their main units pretty much are OBSEC besides the boats, and they have a good amount of firepower. Bor'kan helps to blunt that, but I have brought tools that are also particularly good into them. The big crisis unit is very hard for them to deal with. The commander that's loaded up with all the buffs is quite annoying for them to deal with as well. And then I have a lot of minuses to charge on my objectives that I'm going to try and disrupt charges with. And the Sunshark Bombers are also a great tool there, which is annoying for them to deal with when that -1 strength comes in. So them and Harlequins and Demons I expected here. They're 2 of Tau's toughest matchups in general. And so I've overly teched for them while not making myself too much weaker, I don't think, into the other armies, Aldari as well. So I really tried to focus on the armies that can be non-interactive and have a secondary / playstyle advantage, in which I'm going to have to make something happen. I'm going to have to beat them from that point. So that's kind of what this list is designed to do. Hopefully it ends up working on the tabletop, but I'm excited to play it. I think we've been seeing a lot of very different Tau ideas doing well across the meta, and I'm just throwing another new one into the pot, and we're going to see how it performs. So hope you enjoyed this one. Can't wait to play it in the stream games. Hope everybody is excited for the Streamhouse RTT, and thanks so much for listening. I will see everybody soon for those games. So long for now.
Art of War is partnering up with Goonhammer and Joe from War Games Live to bring to you the greatest Streamhouse RTT ever. We've gathered the strongest competitors out there. Quentin Johnson, Kazra Hushidar, Adam Camilleri, Mark Perry, Nick Nadavati, Richard Siegler, John Lennon, and current ITC champion Jack Harpster. These brave warriors are going to duke it out for you over a double elimination format Thursday, March 30th through Sunday, April 2nd. 15 games, 11 rounds, all streamed to you on the Art of War YouTube channel. We asked our friends over at Goonhammer to seed us and put us into a bracket, and then in reverse order of seed, we drafted factions. 8 top players, 8 different factions. We've even partnered with Away Games, who's professionally painted 2 beautiful sets of Art of War specific terrain. That's right, we're creating our own Art of War tournament terrain set. Watch live, and not only can you catch the action in real time, but you'll be entered into a raffle to win prize support from our wonderful sponsors, objective markers from 3D6 Wargaming, Army Painter Mega Sets from the Army Painter, Warp Fire Minis, Big Bear 3D, Table War, and so many more. Keep an eye on the Art of War YouTube channel for daily list reveals starting Wednesday, March 15th. All games will be available for rewatch for our War members at any time.